Alright, so in our last episode, now let's get rid of our old avocado because we don't like the old one. We like our new kind of really cool avocado. Now we're gonna get into how to export this. We're gonna go into the rendering part to make this look like the thumbnail of what you're looking at. So, of course, first thing we're gonna do is open Blender. Blender. I have Blender 4.0. Blender's completely free, so of course just download it. It's an amazing free tool. Gonna kind of snap it to this, get the borders right. We're gonna click on general, and the first thing that we're gonna do on Blender, we're gonna click A. It's very simple, and select everything, and you delete that little random annoying cube. We're gonna go back into Rhino, and we're gonna export the little shape. Now we can get rid of our sub objects filter. We can deselect this, so now we can select our things like this. And the first thing we want to do is we just want to export this. So we just select the whole thing and just type in export, right? We can export it. I'm just going to put it into my desktop. And so we're going to go into OBJ. So when you save as a file tab, you can do OBJ, you can do FBX, you can do a lot of other. Rhino has so many ways to save files. But we're going to do OBJ just because it's the default one. And we're going to call it avocado cool. And there. You're going to get this exporting options. Make sure it's a mesh because that's what you want to do. Formatting, none of this you really should care about. Naming, we don't have any groups, we don't have any layers, so we don't worry about this. And then on meshes, I mean, the normal meshing level is going to be this. This is just how detailed your mesh is going to be. If you increase it to the max, your mesh will be more detailed, but you can always add that detail in Blender anyway. For now, let's just keep it in the detail in the default way, and let's make sure it's welded so our mesh is not broken up. And that's it. You just click OK. It will export, and now we are gonna go back into Blender. So we're gonna open back. We're gonna open Blender back again, and we're gonna go into File, and we're gonna go into Import. And of course, we're gonna go into Wavefront, and it might be hard to find. And I'm always looking around to find Wavefront, but it's called Wavefront and it's OBJ. So we're gonna click on Wavefront OBJ. We're gonna go into our desktop. We're gonna grab our avocado cool, and of course, it's huge. So maybe we want to scale it down a little bit. Now, in order to move around in Blender, you can also use this little thing right here. You just grab it and you see in 3 dimensions. But in Blender, you use your middle button. That's the way to rotate. If you hold shift with your middle button, you pan instead of rotating. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If you click S, you will scale your things down. So in Blender's pretty easy. To scale things, you're just going to do S. To move things, you're going to use G. To rotate R, pretty straightforward. But for this tutorial, we're not really going to go over moving things in Blender. We're just going to scale it down enough so it's kind of a normal size, right? Now, if we want to zoom selected, we're going to click this little shape right here, and we're going to pan over these and just go on view selected, and we go back into our nice little avocado. So now the first thing that we want to do is probably divide our seed from our entire avocado. So how do we do that? In Blender, the way you go into sub objects, you go in tab. So when you click tab, you're going to see how now you see every single element and you're able to kind of modify them, right? But we just want to divide it by parts. So we're going to go into tab. We're going to click A to select everything. And you're going to click P to separate things. Now, it'll usually have different ways to separate things. You can do by selection, by material, by loose parts. But of course, we're going to go by loose parts since these two are loose together. And now if we click tab again, now we have this and this. And so now we can start adding materials. So in order to add materials in Blender, we're going to go into our nice shading workspace. And so in your shading workspace, it's pretty much all you're going to do is shading. So before, I usually just kind of rearrange my tabs. So I usually get rid of these. So actually, let me just merge this with this. Then merge this with this. It's kind of annoying how Blender does it. Yeah, and then we move this way. So yeah, if you right click, when you have this little arrow, you can join areas, and if you have this little thing, sometimes it joins, sometimes it moves. I still don't know how to make it happen, but okay. We're back here. We're back here into Blender, and we're going to start adding some really nice textures to our shape. So, I mean, we can go for anything, and in a way, there's so many ways into creating texture. We're going to do the procedural process to make textures, but you can always find your own way to make textures. In this case, we're just going to go in a simple procedural kind of way. So as you can see, this is the procedural kind of workspace. You will see there's a material output, and there's a principal BSDF, which is our kind of basic material for everything in Blender, but it gives you a lot of abilities to work things. Now, before we start editing how our avocado is going to look, we're going to have to go over our render tab right here, and we're going to click on cycles, and that's going to give us the ability to see things better. But of course, we're not seeing it in that way yet. So you're going to hold Z. When you hold Z, you have your different shading modes. So now we're looking at material preview, which is using Eevee. We're going to go into solid. You see a solid, but when you go into render, you're going to see a render view that has no lights, so we can't see anything. When we go back to our render tab, we're going to go into device, make sure it's GPU compute, just because your CPU is not probably the best to compute this. And before we start adding lights, we're going to go, if you scroll up here, you're going to see how you move through this tab. You're going to scroll the way down where you start seeing your shading modes, because you can also select your shading modes here. Your render shading mode, we want to click this little arrow, and we want to get rid of the scene lights and the scene world. So now we can have these kind of different scenes that you can click on and kind of just change around in order to just give it a look, in order to just see your material, right? You just want to be able to see it. So now that we select our first material, we're going to go into our materials tab, and you see you have diffuse 0. Materials tab is right here, this little material thing. And as you can see, you have 00, whatever this name, and then on the other one is the same material. So we want to create a clone of this one. So when we go into this material, we can call it just avocado. And the second one, we're going to have to copy it. So you see new material. You want to click on new material. It'll have the same name. In a way, it's copying it. It just says new material, but you're technically copying that material and just adding the one. So you're just going to click it again. And in this case, we're going to call it seed, right? So first things first, our avocado, we're going to start editing a little bit of it. First things first, of course, our avocado has a very kind of greenish look. Again, your avocado can be anything. I mean, it could be orange, it could be yellow, it could be a red avocado for I care. But, you know, we're going to have different cool avocados. So my avocado is going to be greenish because I want to keep I can make kind of a very nasty avocado or a really nice kind of green. Let's use something a little bit like this. A little more artistic, somewhere here. That's a nice color. And then for our seed, as you can see, whenever you click the element, you're going to have the new materials. You can see I'm on the whole different material. For the seed, I'm going to make something a little yellowish. Kind of how in that first rhino model you guys were seeing. Just a little bit of yellowish, you know, so it looks kind of cool. And of course, we're going to give it a metallic look. So of course, as you can see, you have metallic right here. If you just crank this up, you're going to see how it's technically more metallic, but it doesn't look very reflective because your roughness is all the way up. So you want to reduce your roughness. And the more you reduce your roughness, you're going to start seeing how it's super reflective and it start looking really cool. If you like it this way, then you can just go for it. But I'm going to keep it somewhere around here. So it's a nice kind of Transformers metallic look. And maybe you can always reduce your metallic, but I'm going to keep it all the way up. And same for my seed. I'm going to keep my metallicness all the way up. And actually, I'm going to make that one like kind of golden just because it looks pretty cool. So I'll reduce my roughness all the way down. And for this material, I'm going to actually increase the roughness a little bit up. So now we can start adding a little bit of imperfections to our material. Now it looks pretty cool and it looks kind of ready for Instagram, but we want to go to the next level. So we want to add a little bit of details, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start adding more nodes. And so the way in which you add nodes in Blender is with Shift A. So if you hold Shift and A, you're going to have this new kind of node tab where you can start looking for different nodes that add different things. We're going to just search instead of going through all these. We're going to search, we're going to add a noise node, noise texture. So as you can see, it's a new node. You just plop it in there and then you connect it. You can connect it into the base color and you will see how, if you scale it up, you'll see how there's this kind of noise thing going on, right? But we don't want it on our base color. If you want to deselect something, you just control and then hold right click to cut one of these wires. That's just so you disconnect it. What we want to do is add it to the roughness. So as you can see, we have kind of this this kind of roughness thing in some areas and some areas not. And we're going to start cranking up some of the values here. So we can start maybe lowering the scale and maybe adding some roughness, maybe adding some detail, maybe increasing the scale. And you start seeing how there's this kind of nice imperfection to it now that it just makes it look more realistic. But it's not as reflective as I want it. So now I can add another node that will give me the ability to kind of affect that. So if you do Control Shift A again, it's just Shift A, and now we just write ramp or color ramp. We're gonna get color ramp, and this is just a gradient. But what this does is that it's a way to crank values differently. So you can see if I move my black, I will make things a lot more reflective. If I move my white, I will make things a lot less reflective. That's just because of the way the values are being made. So I'm gonna crank it up a little bit more on the reflective side, and I'm gonna also increase the scale of the noise just so the detail is a lot more subtle. Maybe also gonna add some distortion. So you have this very subtle detail of the imperfection of our metal, whatever it is that we have, you know? And I'm just gonna add the same thing to my avocado, right? But maybe for my avocado, instead of a noise texture, actually let's just use a noise texture just because the noise texture works really nicely. We're gonna add into our roughness, and again we're gonna add a color ramp, put it in there, and we're gonna crank up the reflectiveness, which is the black. Leave a little bit of our imperfections, and then we're gonna scale our noise. Actually, let's lower the noise just so there's some big blobs of areas that are not so reflective. Makes it look cooler. And now we have our really nice materials, and you've done it. In the next part, we're gonna go over how to make it a scene, how to add some lights, and how to have it Instagram ready, and you're ready to post your avocado everywhere and be really cool.